Howdy all, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Professor Parks, PhD, and I make content on astronomy, science skepticism, and mental health. And so, as the title of this stream would suggest, I would like to talk about some of the things that Sabine Hossenfelder has been talking about pretty much over the last couple years. Specifically, there is a Nature article that she put out in 2017 and a couple of videos. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go over or address the topics that Sabine has addressed in her most recent video, which is this one. I was asked to keep this confidential. And so I would like to express my thoughts on this particular video and then potentially open it up to people to come on the show and discuss it with me. Because I think that this is, given certain, how should I put this, strong assertions. Before, she would put this sort of thing in the context of sort of a warning. Now she is being far more definitive as to what's actually going on. And like I said, I have thoughts. Now, what am I talking? Sorry, I saw it. We're talking about an anti-trans activist. Yeah, that's another topic that Sabine and I drastically are divergent on. Is I watched her video on transsexualism, on transgender, and reviewing the science about it, and I found her approach to be flawed. But anyway, that's not actually the topic of this particular video. But yeah, wave a flag, go nuts. Anyway, so in the most recent, yes, so kind of putting this up here, I know that Professor Dave did a video on this over here. I failed why academia sucks. To be honest with you, I didn't watch it because I kind of think Professor Dave's a dickhead. But, you know, to each their own. So let's go over that the confidential video, the one that she put out like 3-4 days ago. In it, she reads an email that she received from a colleague. She keeps it confidential to the point that she does not specify the person's name and redacts a couple of things that would indicate that person's field of study or allow it be easier to dox that particular individual. Even still, I have a strong suspicion on who wrote this, and if I'm correct, that person has already shown that they are a massive douche canoe anyway. So, yeah. The email she reads out is talking about or addressing this concept of, again, that Sabine has been hammering on, that in the field of high energy physics, as it relates to cosmology, we're kind of in a rut and have been in a rut for 30 years. She refers to it as a bubble. The idea is we pursue certain avenues of thought or certain avenues of research, regardless of what the results of that research is, in the exclusion of anything else. And so she has been advocating that that institutional change needs to be brought into effect in order to prevent that from happening, in order to burst that bubble and get people what they need in order to explore alternate theories of, say, dark matter. And by what they need, really what I'm talking about is money. So, never tell Sabine anything in confidence. Yeah. Like I said, at least she didn't dox the person. The email that she received was very much pushing back on it. And the rationale was very much pushing back on this idea that the system is rigged, the system is broken, and needs to be changed. And the most notable thing that stuck out to me was, you know, you can't do this because what's going to happen is the people that are invested into CERN or new particle colliders or new neutrino detectors, they're going to be out of a job, and they have families and children that they need to provide for. And basically, you're going to fuck over a whole bunch of people if you don't continue with the status quo. One, that's a rather cynical way of looking at things. And two, that is a deeply flawed way of looking at the realities within academia as it now stands. Now, because I loves me some common ground, let me first start off by saying what I agree with in terms of this video. And then I'll talk about the problems I have with it. But I will start off by saying that this video feels to me to be the equivalent of a boomer telling physicists to get off her fucking lawn. That's the feel that I have from it. This is coming from a deep-seated place of emotion, primarily anger and irritation. But regardless, so what Sabine has been railing against is this idea that high-energy physics is incapable, or actually actively refuses to move beyond certain concepts, primarily the particle nature of dark matter, basically neutrinos and things of that nature. That we continually look for these exotic particles that are not predicted by theory. And we've been doing so for decades and have yet to find anything that even remotely gives us a hope that is in fact a relative or a rational or good explanation for dark matter. We've been banging our head against this for so long and getting nothing in return. And yet there are many, many different alternatives to dark matter. I was at a talk fairly recently on the subject of dark matter. And a woman put up a graphic, which I really wish I had up here, put up a graphic of all of the possible explanations for dark matter, things from cold dark matter neutrino to supersymmetry to alternative theories of gravity, all sorts of things. And I will say that from my experience, yes, we have been hammering away at one or two sections of that diagram for years now with no avail. In fact, the talk that I sat through was yet another exploration of cold dark matter, and all that really came out of it was that they were able to shrink the phase space of possibilities. Basically, they were able to limit or push down the limits of how energetic the dark matter neutrino has to be or can be, and its mass and other characteristics. They didn't find any, but they were able to exclude particles of certain energies and certain characteristics, which is important. However, that's where all the funding is going, effectively. That is where basically the research is driven. And that, from an objective standpoint, is problematic because things like MOND, things like other alternatives to dark matter, they're not fully being explored. And so in that, Sabine has a very valid criticism. She basically is saying that the research, or the other thing that she heavily implies, or really outright states, is that there is a bias within the astronomical community or the HEP community, high energy physics community. There's a bias driven by money. Now, science is not perfect. Like any human endeavor, it is flawed. It is even more so because it involves money. And if you put money into any system, it's going to get corrupted, because mo money, mo better. We all like money. We all want money. And so we are going to try to game the system either slightly or not so subtly or not so subtly. We're going to try to game the system in order to get as much money as we can because we need it to do the things that we want to do. That's just simple reality. That's what it boils down to. The issue that I have with Sabine's messaging is it lacks nuance. She is correct in that there is a baked-in bias in astronomy and that area of physics. I can't speak to other fields of view or other fields of study, although given her comments, there are electrical engineers, nuclear physicists, and all sorts of people who are like, yeah, you're right, there is a bias here. But while she doesn't state it outright, she heavily implies that everyone in the high energy physics field of study is complicit in this. They are aware of the situation and they don't care. And they actively perpetuate it because, that is where the money is. Then they are actively moving their research aims, their research projects to be in line where the money is. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I have to say that I don't fully agree with that. I do not think that everyone in a particular branch of science, in this case, HEP, is in on it, is simply motivated by money. This is where the money is, so this is where my research is going to go. I believe that there are folks who honestly think that that dark matter does have a particle nature of the exotic variety. It should be noted that I believe Sabine is not a fan of the standard model and not a fan of quantum mechanics in general. I believe in a recent panel discussion that I watched, if pressed as to which one was an accurate theory, if you had to choose which one was correct and which one was not between GR and quantum mechanics, she would go with GR without question. So in my case, I think her bias is also showing because she really, really doesn't like the idea that dark matter is a particle in nature. Then, yeah, she really hates where the branch of study is going. And that was basically the point, I think. It's been a while. That video is 10 months old. Why she was talking about why she left academia, why she left research science, is because there were these walls that were put up. You couldn't get funding for alternative ideas. You could only get funding for basically going with the flow, going with what was considered to be the right direction in terms of research. Let's see. Do you agree with Sabine that the high universe is Jesus Christ. I almost made a video about that. Let me say this in regards to that. What I've noticed is that there are levels of professorship. There's an assistant professor who comes in. You have an associate professor. They've gotten tenure. Then you've got full professor. They basically, if we want to be cynical about it, have brought in a sufficient amount of money that the university says, kudos, here's a full professorship. And then you have kind of a branch. You have, for the most part, the emeritus professor, basically a dude that's semi-retired, hangs out, really doesn't do much, might teach a class here or there, but basically he's just there taking up a faculty line. But then you also have quack professor. You have a professor who is just somehow, for some reason, lost their fucking mind. And they come up with things like the fact that the universe is a giant fucking brain. Yeah. Or they think that the universe is geocentric in nature and that kinematics does not, in fact, predict anything. So yeah, quackitude happens as a professor gets older. I've noticed that this is not a non-zero possibility. But anyway, I'm going to move off that point. So again, Sabine has a point. Research. I'm going to say astronomical research, cosmological research, because that's what I'm most familiar with. It has a bias. It has a bias baked into it, and it's not subtle. To give you an idea, let's talk about this thing, which started, I believe, in the 70s. And this is known as the decadal survey. So the National Academy of Sciences, Medicine, and Engineering has astronomers get together every decade. A lot of astronomers get together every decade, create panels related to subfields within astronomy, such as planetary formation, cosmology, galactic evolution, things of that nature. And this panel then reviews the current science and says, these are the questions we want to answer. These are the directions we want to go. And then it publishes it. You can find it, and I'm actually going to download these and put them on my Discord if anyone's interested in it. The Decadal Survey for 2020 comes in at a brisk 628 pages. But for those of you who actually have other things to do with their time, you can actually get, where is it? The highlights, which comes in at 28 pages. If you really aren't, like I said, only interested in the highlights. Howdy, Alan. So let's talk about this. What is it and what's in it? So astronomers get together, form panels. This one was done over Zoom because of obvious reasons. And they get rid of, they talk about what's next. Where do we want to see? How to, where do we want to go with this? And this cover basically illustrates a couple of the different things that astronomers or astronomy wants to highlight. These are the questions that are most interesting to us as a community right now. One, exoplanets. We all love some aliens. So we want to know, it is of a high priority to know how planets form in around other star systems. So we've got to detect them. We've got to detect them at various stages of life. We've got to be able to determine the atmospheres of these planets, their compositions, looking for biomarkers, all that sorts of stuff. That is something that, as a community, we have said, yep, we're on board. We want to answer that question. Then you have, down here represents basically cosmology, where you have, we are interested in the cosmic, can't remember how they put it, cosmic neighborhood or something of that nature. So questions that we want answered are the conundrums related to the to the beginnings of the universe and the endings of the universe. So anything that related to how the universe is going to end, dark energy, dark matter, that sort of thing, and how the universe began, the reconciliation between general relativity and quantum mechanics, those are of priority. And then up here is to illustrate that another thing that we are wanting to do is large, high cadence surveys. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that we want to take images in many different wavelengths, so optical, infrared, radio. We want to take images of the entire sky at a very high rate. So once a day, once a day, once a week, that sort of thing. We want to be able to have a record of the entire sky that is updated every couple of days. And that program would last years. So the most relevant example of that is the Vera Rubin telescope. The Roman telescope. The Roman telescope, I'm getting there are names, and they're both named after women. I get them confused. One of them, which was formerly known as the LSST, and actually I'm going to look this up because it's bothering me. Nancy Roman. Okay, so it is the Vera Rubin. So the Vera Rubin telescope, I was right the first time, is a telescope that is going to sample the entire sky leave the optical and infrared once every 3 days. So it's going to produce petabytes of data. Terabytes, definitely terabytes of data at night, petabytes of data pretty much every week. Just a massive amount of data. And the reason why we want this is because with new machine learning and new AI trained algorithms, we can have computers dive into that vast array of information and pick out patterns. See whether or not we can see things like exoplanet transit. See if we can find stars that very similarly or in the same way as Boyajian star, which got a lot of press because of the possibility of an alien megastructure. So there are a lot of questions in astronomy that cannot be answered unless you have a large sampling of stars that are observed a lot. And so that was the other third kind of pillar of the decadal survey, is these massive survey missions. Now, what does this have anything to do with what Sabine was talking about? Well, like I said, this is commissioned by the National Academy, so Americans, but NASA pretty much takes its cue. NASA and the NSF, National Science Foundation, these are two key funding organizations. They take their cues from the decadal survey. And so projects that are going to get more often, or projects will have a higher likelihood of being accepted and funded if the projects are in line with the goals outlined in the decadal survey. So right away, we see a bias. These are the questions that the astronomical community are interested in. If you are attempting to answer a question that the community has decided is a low priority, you're probably not going to get money. From my understanding, the first decadal survey, one of the biggest things that wanted to be answered was binary stars. Binary stars are extremely useful in being able to determine precise radii and masses of stars. And so back in the 70s, if you were into binary stars, you were making bank. Not so much anymore. We have studied the shit out of binary stars. Not to say that we have answered all the questions by any stretch of the imagination, but it's no longer sexy. Aliens are sexy. Exoplanets are sexy. And so that is what's going to get money. So already we see a bias that is baked into the system. So again, I believe that she has a point with this. Now let's talk about why is money important to an astronomer? So let's see. Again, my area of my experience is in traditional academia, university-based physics or university-based research. But that's not always where research is done. Research can also be done at pure research institutions like JPL, NASA Goddard, places like this. Oh, I should also say that The decadal survey, the Europeans also take their cues from the decadal survey. So ESA also tends to fund things that are in line with the decadal survey. I don't know about the Japanese or the Russians and the Chinese. I definitely don't know about the Chinese. So why do we need money? What are the expenses that an astronomer has to shell out in order to get research done? Particularly if you're an observationalist or you are a theorist who relies on supercomputing, because observations and time on a supercomputer cost money. You have to pay in order to get time on a telescope. It ranges based on the telescope, based on how popular the telescope is. That can range a few grand for a week or so. I don't know. I'm really kind of pulling that out of my ass, but it's not unsubstantial. It's prohibitively not, or it's prohibitive to the average lay scientist. If I wanted to out of pocket try to get time on Keck, assuming that I had a project that was bang on that they loved, I couldn't afford time on Keck out of pocket. So I need research funds in order to do that. I also need to spend money to publish. Most journals require that I pay them to publish my work. They then charge the university money to be able to have access to it. Journals are a racket, and maybe I'll get into that later on, but that's definitely a fucking problem that needs to be addressed. But the reality is, if you want to have your papers published in a prestigious journal, you've got to pay for it. You also will need help. Science is collaborative. And so we often have, at the department level, we have research groups headed by a single professor, and then they have, depending on the size and funding, they will have postdocs or research scientists that are assisting them. They are full-time PhDs that are going to be doing research. And then you have a gaggle of grad students, and maybe even some undergrads. If you are kind to your grad students, you're probably only going to have 2 grad students. But if you have trouble saying no, then you may have 4 or 5 grad students. You've got to pay them. And when I say pay them, you have to, full salary that they can live on. And typically that is very much cost of living dependent. But here, I believe our graduate stipends are about $25K. So a year. So if you want to host a grad student to help you do this, work, if you have 2 grad students working on a project for 2 years, you need $100,000 right off the bat. Obviously, you can't pay that out of pocket. Now, depending on your university, your grad students may get funded through the department for a certain amount of time, but at some point, usually after the second year, the department no longer funds higher or advanced grad students. So if you want them to work for you, you have to find the money to pay them. That in itself is problematic because, generally speaking, you start getting into benefits and how grad students get fucked when it comes to benefits. But again, that is a separate issue. You also need travel expenses to go to these, to go to conferences in order to share your information. You have to go to, sometimes you have to go to telescopes, but that's becoming less and less of an issue because telescopes are now becoming more and more remotely operated. And of course, space, you can't really go to JWST in order to use it, but you need to have money for that. You need to have money for equipment, particularly if you're an instrumentationalist. If you want to build your own camera to answer a certain question, you're going to need money for the supplies for that camera. Or you need to just buy a new camera off the shelf. So you need money for that. You need new computers in order to do it. For the theorist, instead of buying time on a telescope, they buy time on a supercomputer, which again, not really all that, not all that inexpensive. I don't think the average person could afford time on a Cray, assuming that Crays are still the gold standard in terms of supercomputers. So that's a reality. You really can't do science, like cutting edge science, without funding. You can't get the observations. You can't publish your work. You can't deal with the amount of data that you have because you don't have the staffing or the people power in order to do it. And so yeah, that is the ugly reality of science, is that it needs money. Now, let's get into the topic of indirect cost, which is also a fucking racket, but which actually you may, if you've been paying attention to the Trump administration and Elon, Doge and all that, in terms of science, you may have heard that they're attempting to fix that problem. The problem is this. You have what are known as indirect costs, or what I would refer to as overhead costs. At a university, that cost is anywhere between 50 to 60% of the awarded grant. That's right, folks. If I get awarded $1 million grant from the government, at best, I will see 500,000 of it. The other 500,000, that goes to my host that goes to the university. That goes to the host institution for overhead, basically so that they can fund, or they can basically manage how you are spending that money. Because as I've said in a previous video, you can't just go out and buy a Bentley with that. You have already put forward a proposal that says, this is the amount of money I want to spend on equipment. This is the amount of money I want to spend on telescope time, so forth and so on. And you will get denied. You will not have access to your own money if you're attempting to buy something that has not been properly budgeted. So yeah, you can't enrich yourself in this process. The money that you do get, the 50% that they deem to dole out to you, that has specific purposes. And I've run into this problem many times where we have attempted to buy something or get something and been denied because that thing was not properly accounted for in the budget. And sometimes it gets real petty. Howdy, Clive. Welcome to the show. The university would rather a professor gets a grant rather than write a grant paper. Yes, that is also part of this problem. So so I mentioned that 50%, 50-60%, that goes to the university, presumably for overhead to manage the grants. That's not actually the case. For that money, there is no oversight. They can fucking use it however they want to. They can use it for football pads if they want to. The university basically can spend their half, their indirect cost, however they want to. And that's baked into the system. So the university operates with a budget with the understanding that it's going to get a certain amount of research funding injected into that budget. And so that is taken into account for things like building new buildings, paying faculty so that you can grow a department, all sorts of things that affect the university from, in my opinion, legitimate ways, and then in my opinion, not so legitimate ways, like sporting, new stadiums and all that kind of good shit. So that's in there. And what Trump and Elon have done is they have slashed that to 15%, which on the surface is great. More money for the researchers. That's how it should be, in my opinion. However, the reality of it is that the university is expecting 50%. And so they are going to do something with that money. If they don't get that money, then that grant may be denied. The university may say, nope, we are not going to support this. And the university the university support of the grant money is part and parcel of getting the grant itself. So if I apply for a grant, in order to get awarded that grant from NASA, George Mason has to say, yes, he can have that grant. If you slash the indirect costs from 50 to 15, depriving the university of that sweet slush fund money, then it can very well say, well, fuck off. You're not, grant? What grant? You're not getting this. They're going to take their toys and go home because they're getting screwed over. So, cutting indirect costs, theoretically, good idea. This is also part of the broken system within the university or within research funding. You'll find a theme around this. The system is broken. The system is broken in various different levels. You have the indirect costs. You have the fact that you have tenure in certain ways is broken. Tenure allows professors to become emeritus and not do anything, not do much, not really contribute to the department's health. They certainly don't take on grad students. They take up what are called faculty lines. A department has a set number of faculty members that they can have on board, and they take up one of those slots where a young professional, a young astronomer getting his PhD who wants a job can't get one because you have a person who is really not contributing much, who is just kind of hanging out there being paid and being semi-retired. And some of them become quacks on top of that. So the tenure system is fucked. The journal system is fucked. The peer review system is, I shouldn't say fucked, flawed. The peer review system is flawed. For astronomers, peer reviewed system is A, anonymous, and B, it has one reviewer. Now, I'm not going to get too far into why that is problematic, but trust me, there are problems there with that particular model that need to be fixed. Now let's get back to that bias thing that Sabine is talking about. The fact that you got to follow the money. If you don't basically toe the line, then you are not going to get funded. And so therefore your ideas are not going to be pursued because you can't afford all of these other various things. I talked about how it is baked in with the decadal survey. It's baked in other ways. Thank you, Ian. Ian for $9.99 American. Thank you for making this such an informational Cordoba Tuesday. It's a burrito shop, for those of you who don't know. I need data. I need access to a telescope, a research grade telescope, for a set time to observe the objects that are going to help me answer a particular question. I have to apply for that time. I have to put together a proposal saying, this is the question I want answered, and this is how I'm going to do it. And you also have to follow it up with, this is all the other work that I've done in relation to this. Because that goes to what's known as a Telescope Allocation Committee, or TAC. It is made up of astronomers who, again, theoretically are experts in that field. So if I wanted to know, I wanted to look at, say, planetary or exoplanet frequency rates as a function of metallicity, stellar metallicity, then the people on that TAC would be, the people looking at that proposal would primarily be people who are exoplanet scientists. Maybe not. Depends on the telescope. But it is human driven. Each of these individuals, each of these humans has their own bias as what they perceive to be the correct answer or the correct approach. And so they are going to look at these proposals through that lens, and they very well may deny a proposal that they do not think is scientifically sound. That has problems, obviously. That is where flaws can come into it. So that is another piece of bias baked into the system, that people may not be able to get time to get the data to answer certain questions if the TAC doesn't think their questions, or rather their scientific endeavor, is worth anything, worth going over to it. So you need money from a grant. You need money from a NASA or NSF. So you've got to put forward a research proposal that says, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to do it. They also have their grant proposal committee, or the grant reviewing committee, again, presumably made up of experts in the field. Really, among academia, this sort of thing is kind of like jury duty. Professors really don't like doing it because they don't get paid for it, and so they will do whatever they can to kind of get out of it. So again, theoretically, it's not the best of the best, the cream of the crop. You do get effectively people who either want that kind of power or really can't justify getting out of it. So again, as with the TAC, they're going to evaluate your science through a certain perception, through a certain bias. This is one of the reasons why I harp on worldviews so fucking much, is that as scientists, we need to rid ourselves of as much bias as possible. And, in the context of flat earth and all that, usually that bias is religious. But in the context of science, those biases can be things like determinism. I reject anything that quantum mechanics really has to say. And so I will reject any kind of science that pursues those questions. So there are biases within that. Everyone has biases. Unfortunately, that's not something that we can get rid of, but we can mitigate it. So Sabine is right. There is a bubble that is manufactured by science itself. So your funding possibilities come with biases, or are affected by the biases of the people who award the money. The ability to get telescope time is biased by the people who run the telescope. It's whether or not they feel that your science is valid and all that. Publishing through peer review, there is the potential that the peer reviewer will look at your paper and basically think that it's unpublishable because of what it has to say. Now, I don't know of a case where something has been censored. So if somebody has put forward an Aether idea, or an idea that depends on Aether being a thing, that it has been censored and not published or whatever, I don't know of a case where that has actually happened. So if you have this sort of work, you are left with publishing in non-peer review and frankly predatory journals where they really get after you for money. So yeah, that is the reality of things, is that there are institutional biases that are inside astronomy, physics, which guide, or have basically are not guide rails, but blinders would be a good way. Blinders to any other sort of thought beyond the sort of status quo. Now, that's what I agree with Sabine on this, in this video. What I don't agree is the severity in which she stresses this. Because she can be very, very well misinterpreted, or I don't know, maybe she states this outright. It can be very well misinterpreted by saying, oh, yes, you can also put it on archive. Archive is it is not peer reviewed, but it is essentially a publishing house of articles where the editor, it has to be accepted, but you can put it on archive and you can put it, and basically people have free access to it. Generally speaking, what I've seen with archive are people that put out papers just at either right before peer review or just right after peer review, but before they actually get published, so that the information can get out there. There is some debate as to whether or not you should publish it first on archive, put it up on archive before it's been fully reviewed or after. That's a different conversation entirely. Other things that I've seen on archive are basically idea papers. Hey, I've got this idea. You sketch out that idea in a paper, and you basically just get it out there to see if you can drum up some interest for collaboration. Fun things like that. But yeah, archive is definitely something that you can do. It is routine for many journals for editors to summarily reject papers for lack of scientific worth. Yes. Now, the bar, and this is something that Sabine addresses in her 2017 Nature paper, is that she wants a revamping of what is considered scientifically worthy. It's been a very long time since I've read that paper, so I don't really remember what the specifics of the thing is. The person who wrote the email basically told her her ideas were untenable, that they effectively would put everyone out of business and all that kind of good stuff. Where was I going with this? But the way that Sabine talks about this, she talks about it as if it's completely exclusionary, that there is no outside avenues of research, that it's only about particle physics. All of the money goes into a certain paradigm of what dark matter is, and nothing else gets funded. She doesn't state that explicitly, but that's a strong impression. That is simply not true. Outside ideas do get funded, but they do get funded less than what is considered to be the best answer at present, or the way that you want to, that the way that the science consensus, what we think should go. I'm not really stating that very well, but at the moment, like as I've said before, the cold dark matter model is the best model that we have. That has implications as to what kind of particle or what kind of thing dark matter is. And so the research, generally speaking, goes to trying to find that particular brand of dark matter. And that is what her problem is because she does not believe that that particular type of dark matter exists. And that, in her mind, again, heavily implied, no other form of research is really being explored and given the funding that it should have. Not exactly true. But I wanted to address, and really this is for anyone in the Aether community that is listening, because one of the things that I've heard from flat earthers is that science is regulated by them, by they, whoever they are. In one case, in certain cases, they or them are basically a cabal of scientists, cabal of satanic atheists who want to hide God from you. Well, this doesn't address that. Sabine does not mention God. She does not mention anything of that nature. So this video is not relevant to that. What it is relevant to is the idea that scientists have this preconceived idea of what is reality a priori to evidence, and then shut down any lines of inquiry that are not accepted within that a priori evidence or a priori assumption. So the working assumption, according to the arguments that I've heard, is that they want relativity to be a thing. They want the universe to be to have have dark matter in it, and have energy in it. And they will shut down anyone who attempts to develop ideas that are contrary to that. That is not what is happening at all. Science is, for all of its flaws, for all of the biases that it has within it, science is evidence supported, evidence driven. So the cold dark matter model is accepted because the evidence supports it. It is currently the best idea or best explanation of the universe in its early, current, and late stage and potential late stages. The evidence tells us this. The evidence does not tell us that aether is a thing. So therefore, if you were to come up with an idea about aether and you were not to get published by it, it's not that they or us or whoever, it's not that they see, oh, this is aether, this is complete crap, this does not fall within our paradigm. It's that the evidence doesn't really support the existence of such a thing. And so anything that is born out of it is highly questionable. So you would first have to have evidence to support that aether exists, which there isn't a substantial amount of it, if any at all. I know I'm going to get pushback on that. Yes, Sabine is a PhD. I should refer to her as Dr. Hossenfelder because I have never met her, but that is more difficult to say than Sabine. So apologies. Yes, she is a very intelligent woman. She is very intelligent. She is very articulate. I do not have a problem with her at all. I have heaps of respect for her. Conscious universe aside, huge amount of respect for her. But my problem is the direction that she is going in terms of the characterization of how science is done. I think that in this day and age, it is very problematic because again, maybe it's just a selection bias, maybe because I deal with or I engage with people who think the earth is flat or who deny the efficacy of vaccines, who think that there are 5G death rays, all that sort of thing. Maybe because I am dealing with them directly, I am inflating that sort of mentality to a larger general public. But I don't think so, particularly in terms of the vaccine sorts of things. I think that there is a large portion of the United States population that doubts the efficacy of vaccines. Case in point, we just appointed one of these people as our Health and Human Services Secretary. Yay! USA! USA! Fuck. Anyway, so vaccine misinformation is definitely prevalent. And that's part of the whole thing, is that statements like this can be very easily misinterpreted to support the idea that there is a grand cabal of scientists who are attempting to direct science into a direction that they want it to be, a religion of sorts. That the scientists are biased and have a preconceived notion of what the people should hear and reject anything beyond that. That is not what is happening. There is nuance here that needs to be considered. There are features within the academic scientific research apparatus that are flawed, and that there needs to be conversations, particularly with someone who is as vocal and has the platform that Dr. Hossenfelder has. These conversations need to be brought into the mainstream, into the light. Not blanket statements like physics has created a bubble and scientists within that bubble recognize it and refuse to break it. That exactly isn't helpful, in my opinion. So that's really what I wanted to address with this. Is I'm fairly confident that this video in particular is going to be used by science skeptics in support of this idea that science is a religion, that science has a preconceived notion or a worldview of how the universe is that is not evidence-based, that is in fact money-based. Oh, another thing I wanted to say about this is that professors get a salary. It's not as high as I would like it to be. And again, it depends on cost of living, but they get a salary. And if they get tenure, they don't have to bring in money. They can just do their thing. They can just live their life doing whatever it is they want to be doing. They don't have to bring in grant money. So the idea that our livelihoods are dependent upon grant money is also inaccurate. Now, it is true that in order to get tenure, you do have to have a record of bringing in some money and some active research. But again, that's nuanced. So there isn't a certain cap of you have to bring in this amount of money or you're out. It's department dependent. So each department has its own ways of determining who gets and who doesn't get tenure. For the most part, in my experience, most people who apply for tenure get tenure. But once you've gotten tenure, you don't have to bring in grant money because that's what tenure is. You just you have your position, and unless you do something really wacky, like sit in your office that has that 2 of the 4 walls are glass, if you sit in your office without your pants on, if you do that, then your tenure might get revoked. And yes, that is very specific for a reason. So yeah, the idea that our livelihoods depend on promoting a certain religious point of view is also highly inaccurate and highly misleading. So, but these videos, this one and why I failed, academia sucks, or whatever, this begins to start to supply evidence that can be used in support of that mindset, in support of the mindset that science is in fact a religion that is prompted by money. The conversation is much more nuanced than that, and I think much more important. It is an important thing. Is an important discussion to have, and we're not really having those discussions. So, okay. Where was I going with this? So yeah, that's basically what I have to say on the whole Sabine thing. If you would like to come on, I'm only going to be streaming for another half hour or so. I'm already kind of getting a headache, and I don't want to even remotely compete with Tune. But if you want to come on and chat with me on the stream, if you have thoughts on this, that sort of thing, I would love to hear them. Particularly, again, if any of the Aether community are out there or any of the flat earthers out there want to have a dialogue, I would love to have one. But if there are people in the scientific academia like PhD Tony or Dr. Clive, if they want to have a discussion, please hit me up on Discord and I'll send you a link to this stream. So let me take this time to say hi to folks. Howdy, Rachie. Triceratops is malleable. Howdy, welcome. I don't think I've seen you here before. I suspect your name may in fact be Sarah. Howdy, Nimrod. Eric, welcome. Cygnus, good to see you. Rasheen, always nice to have you here. And yeah, where else? Talking about mental health. Let's see, because you're closed off and fearful. Do I have a yeah, I have no idea where it's going on with this. Science, flat earthers call it scientism. I fucking hate that term. But yes, yeah, Oddly enough, the first person I heard that term from, the first person I've heard utter that phrase was, her name was something Red. Crap, I can't think of it. She was an odd duck. She was only active for maybe a year. As the name would imply, redheaded. Her shtick was to sit around sipping wine in lingerie and orphan red. Thank you. Orphan red. Sit around in lingerie, drinking wine, talking about how the earth is flat. Like, all right, you do you. That's, I guess, one way to do it. I haven't seen her or heard about her for a very long time. But anyway, so Orphan Red was the first person that I heard utter the phrase scientism, or she introduced me to that phrase. Yeah, apparently she's in Mensa, which I actually don't doubt. I would not be surprised if she isn't actually in Mensa, because I did kind of get Poe vibes off her quite a bit, but particularly with the whole lingerie bit and the whole hee thing. Yeah, it's actually kind of uncomfortable to watch. But anyway, so what else can I say? What else has been bugging me about that? About this? Let's see. I was going to talk about pronouns, and because I occasionally get the comment about how I would be taken seriously if I didn't display my pronouns. The reason why I was going to talk about pronouns is because of something that I just read about, or was just informed of, and that is the National Stonewall Monument has removed the T from LGBT community. It is no longer a memorial to what happened at Stonewall, the riot that promoted the riot for gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual rights. It is only now for gay, lesbian, and bisexual rights. It is a way of eradicating that transsexuals or people who are transgendered exist. And please forgive me if I am being somewhat inarticulate in my speech in that regard, but I find that to be entirely repugnant. It's kind of like taking black people off monuments of the reference to black people off monuments of Martin Luther King. It's the reality. Trans folks exist. They were part of the Stonewall event. They are part of the LGBTQ community. To get rid of them is just simply wrong. And so the reason why I have my pronouns, and I will continue to display my pronouns, is not because I think that people are confused and don't think that I'm a dude. Pretty sure people can pick up that I'm a dude pretty early on. It's not for that. That is to illustrate, or that is to signal that trans folks exist. They are valid. They are here. They should be loved just like everybody else. That's why I have them. And that's why I'm never taking them down. So I kind of wanted to do something on that. Yeah, the DEIA thing bugs the... No, not getting political. Not... anyway. What else do I want to talk about in terms of stuff? I guess I don't have to ramble on for another hour, but I suppose I could. Let's see what's going on in the chat. I am very happy how my university is inclusive. I am sure some are not. At this point, because of the fact that it's a tricky situation. So at this point, Trump and the Trump administration has aggressively gotten rid of any sort of DEI initiatives, to the point that one of the things that we're dealing with here at George Mason, particularly here in the department, is that we have a NASA grant. And in that NASA grant, there is language for DEI. And so we have to figure out what exactly we are allowed to say, what we're exactly not allowed to say. Are we getting the money? Are we not getting the money? If you want to know more about that, I have videos that are for channel members that I talk about that and other details of the Land Alt mission. So if you're curious, become a channel member. PhD Tony. Yes, Tony. Tony, I just saw your DM and I sent you a link. So I think they. Oh, here we go. Howdy, Tony. How are you?
Hello, Rob. I'm well. I had a tooth ripped out, so I'm sore. How are you?
I'm getting a bit of a headache, but otherwise, I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah. I wanted to say that I quite agree with for the most part with what you're saying about science communication. There are things that we can improve about science, but Sabine started one of her videos recently, the last video of hers that I watched, with the statement, I think the most important problem science faces today is the dysfunction inside science. That's by no means true, right? You only need to look at the Trump presidency to know that that isn't the biggest problem that society faces today. So I think she's got a very good set of priorities. And I think she harbors some resentments because of the way she was treated academically, and that's a valid way for her to feel. But she needs to understand that she's doing active harm. It's always a source of frustration to me that when she discusses climate change, she's always going, "We should be calm, we should be practical," but she never mentions the risks posed by tipping points, climate tipping points, which are points at which carbon emissions pass outside of the control of humans because you turn you turn a sink into a reservoir and it just floods carbon into the system. At that point, we've lost control of the system and we're in for whatever the system deals out.
Yeah, we no longer have a sink for CO2
Scary
anymore.
prospect.
So, yeah.
We lose one of our sinks and it turns into a source. And so, yeah, and Clive has said that he's seen some of her videos on physics, and she gets the physics wrong. So he stopped watching her. And this is a recurring theme. Sort of whenever I get the opinions of scientists who are actually specialists in her field, they come to different conclusions than she does. And so while she claims to be sort of a neutral voice, it seems more and more that she's sort of contrarian in many respects.
Yeah, I've gotten that she has a cross to bear, and I agree. That was one of the things that I actually kind of wanted to mention was I think at the very top I mentioned that this video has a lot of emotion attached to it, and I think you're right. I think that is part of that is how she was treated when she was in active research, and she has an axe to grind. In terms, I actually haven't heard her talk about climate change. I've heard her talk about transgender issues, and she basically, I don't think I've ever heard her say that transgender doesn't exist. She just says that the evidence really isn't there for it, which is no, she's just wrong on that point.
She's just wrong, but also she did a very famous video where she sort of did up a straw man that there are people who think that children should be allowed to transition, and there are people who think that transgenderism doesn't exist, and then there are sane people in the middle. Well, that's not actually a good way to frame it. I don't think that any professionals are suggesting that kids should be able to transition just on their say-so, But if you don't start hormone treatments prepubescent, they're kind of pointless, right? You may I know some trans people, that weren't able to start hormone treatments, and they deeply regret it. So I feel she was egregiously wrong in that particular video. But yeah, it happens time and time again that if you know what you're talking about, sort of the videos are frustrating. MC Toon did a correct with respect to G5 and other radio. Like you can check on his channel. I forget which one it was, but Conspiracy Tunes or he did a full video about correcting her on sort of channel club. So yes, she has some good points. I mean, I was telling people in the chat that my group had a paper that we couldn't get published for nearly a decade on the analysis of GRACE data from the GRACE satellite mission, and we were trying to use range accelerations, whereas typically there are two satellites, and we were using the acceleration in the range between them as an observable. And most groups don't use range acceleration; they use range rate. And so when we tried to publish, we kept on running into reviewers who just said, "This is not how GRACE analysis is done. This can't work. Reject the paper." And eventually we had to get a NASA science team representative to come across, visit our group, tell him how we'd done it, and then he did the exact same analysis and confirmed our results that you could get meaningful and indeed vastly improved results by the range accelerations. The range accelerations turn out to be locally sensitive, so they tell you what's happening immediately under the satellite pairs or immediately near them. So it's actually a more sensitive observable than but we couldn't get published for a while, and it's frustrating. But at the same time, you just need to accept that rely on the fact that your data is good and your methodology is good, and eventually it will get published. You need to accumulate evidence.
Yeah, for my own experience, the thing that was frustrating is that when I was doing active research, my active research utilized IR interferometry, and we were this was around the 2010 decadal survey, and we were waiting with bated breath as to whether or not how high of a ranking interferometry as a technique was going to be ranked. And it was ranked fairly low. So a lot of missions to build a larger round-based interferometry were axed. A number of potential space missions weren't funded because the technique, even among the astronomical community, is not very well understood. And so a lot of people, just because they don't understand it, they don't think it works. And so they don't want to put money into it. But this technique is the only real way that we can actually resolve the surfaces of stars beyond our own. And if we want to know things about the dynamics of how stars create magnetic fields, how flares are developed, that sort of thing, we're going to need interferometry to really answer those questions. And yet there's no money in it.
Yeah. And that's something that it's deeply regrettable, but it's the sort of thing that happens. And the thing about science is that hopefully, if that turns out to be a mistake, it will be corrected down the line. You've really got the hope that that sort of scientists will rationally work out that throwing good money after bad is not the way to look at these things. And that is one of the things that that Sabine does bring up, that some of these projects haven't produced sort of outstanding results or groundbreaking results. But on the other hand, I think that that's kind of a false metric. She keeps on going about there hasn't been, it's been ages since we discovered the Higgs boson and what's happened since. Well, yeah, we know a lot. It's going, you can't expect the flow of groundbreaking discoveries to sort of be the same as it was in the early 20th century when we were still working out, relativity and quantum mechanics. It's harder to find stuff now because if it was easy, it had already have been found.
Exactly. And that's, research has been, if you look in the philosophy of science, research, groundbreaking things come in starts and spurts. They're not the status quo. The status quo is actually just kind of reaffirming what we already know, not really getting, really pushing the boundaries or getting a whole lot of new knowledge, just refining the knowledge we already have. So, I think that her patience level on that is a bit low, although I do agree with her on the dark matter issue, as I was saying, in that all we're really doing is lowering, making the phase space smaller and smaller. I would like to see other avenues explored, but not exactly my field, so I don't know exactly what else is being explored. But so in that sense, I agree with her, but as I said, she's taking it too far, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting. I was reading a book by Feynman discussing how it was a complete mystery why earthquakes occurred, and I had to remind myself that he was writing this book in the 1950s when plate tectonics wasn't accepted, and it took the best part of a decade from 1960 to 1970 before the evidence became overwhelming, and you look back on that and you think, oh, it's foolish. Why didn't they accept the evidence when it first appeared? Well, they shouldn't just accept every new idea that comes along. It's sort of an evolutionary process. You need to provide pressure so that only the really outstanding and evidentially supported hypotheses are adopted and accepted. So this conservatism, this resistance to new ideas actually makes it so that only the best ideas get through. And ultimately, if your idea is correct, it will accumulate enough evidence to get accepted.
Yes, I think that is valid. And I think that actually does happen. Now, does that happen in a straight line? Does it take a long time to sometimes prevail in certain cases? Yes, it does. But ultimately, as I was saying before, is that science is evidence driven. This is not some kind of cabal that is trying to channel science into one direction or another. So I agree that ultimately,
I just feel the need to interrupt you there. Because this has been way too civil and way too rational, so I feel I need to be rude.
No worries. I mean, we could talk about flat, or basically the Aether community, and we want this in a different direction, in the sense that with. That's kind of an example of this, is that, there was for a short period, there was this expectation that an ether has to exist in order for light to propagate, as Maxwell defined it to be. And people tried to make that fit. But ultimately, relativity, the evidence for relativity became overwhelming to the point that Aether really had to be discarded as a relevant theory or relevant idea. So I'm hoping again that people in that community are watching this and kind of understand that the standard of evidence for Aether existing is not met, but for relativity it certainly is. So that's why. Go ahead.
Sorry, sorry. That was actually accidental. I didn't mean to talk.
No worries. I was done.
Okay. But that's exactly right. I've had sort of a discussion with Gleam for many years, who asserted that an ether the existence of an ether was an established fact, and simply won't listen to anyone who corrects him that no, it's not an established fact, that the evidence supporting it. And he cites Sabine now in support of his arguments. And the reality is, it may turn out to be the case that there is some form of ether. Certainly, many physicists say, look, light propagates, it's a wave, it must be propagating through something. I've seen physicists with that opinion, but even if it turns out eventually that there is some sort of ether or aether, it's not the case now that we have enough evidence to come to that conclusion, and that is an important point. That is an important scientists. I can't say that it's impossible that a God exists. I can't say that it's impossible that we will discover psychic abilities. I can't say that these things are, but what I can say is I don't have enough evidence at the moment to accept those hypotheses, and that's I feel as scientists that's the standard that we need to be kept to.
Yeah, exactly. There needs to be a certain abundance of evidence in order for us to use that as our paradigm, use that as our foundation for how to explore other problems. Richie, sorry, I thought this was Rachie, but apparently it's Richie, asks, how does relativity dispute aether in a nutshell? Effectively, and Tony, please correct me or add to this, is that aether basically states that there is a medium through which light must propagate, whereas relativity doesn't require that to exist. I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think an aether can exist within general relativity. It's just simply not necessary.
Yeah.
So, it also, I think they were saying, or I think that certain people on the aether community have claimed that you can explain things like length contraction and time dilation via ether winds or what have you, as opposed to relativity. But that's basically what it is in a nutshell.
But I mean, if you're going to do that, how does the aether explain relativistic mass increase? This is a very commonly observed phenomenon. The faster you move something, the more massive it gets, and the harder it is to accelerate. So why does aether make that true? It drops out of relativity very naturally. Why does aether produce gravitational time dilation? We can measure gravitational time dilation on length scales of a millimeter. Aether does not explain that. So the idea that you can just substitute aether for relativity, there's a bunch of observational evidence for relativity that relativity predicted. They weren't these observations did not exist at the time that special and general relativity were considered. But we now have abundant observational evidence that these predictions of the theory are observable and measurable, and that makes the theory a success. And until it doesn't, until we find a better way of explaining things, and it's like general relativity says, look, in these limits where space is relatively flat, and everything's moving at approximately the same velocity, you can basically treat the universe as Newtonian, and you can basically treat gravitation, the Newton's law of is perfectly correct. So in a sense, relativity is an extension of Newtonian theory. It incorporates Newtonian theory inside it. Whatever next step we make has to incorporate relativity inside it.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. That's basically how, well, I don't know how all scientific paradigms change, but that's how relativity has changed, is that any new theory regardless of what it is, regardless of the subject matter, not only has to answer new questions, but it also has to have answers for all the old questions. So it has to be able to, with that new theory, you are going to have to explain why planets go around the sun as they do. For the most part, this is all very classical, but in the case of Mercury, for example, that's one of the first cracks in classical mechanics, is that the precession of Mercury was not as predicted, whereas with general relativity, it was bang on. Also, gravitational lensing, that is something, as you've said, is a prediction of relativity. Relativity is made that has been seen and verified over and over and over again. So Aether has to, any theory that's going to replace it, Aether or otherwise, is going to need to do the same. It's going to have to be able to show why we see light lens in the way that it does. So
Rachel, she points out that General Rel also predicted black holes, which is true. It predicted gravitational time dilation.
Gravitational waves.
Gravitational waves, yes, as you are, Victoria. So, and Clive Wells points out relativity is still a classical theory in the sense that it's non-quantum. And, that I think, I think Clive Wells, as is his wont, has put his finger exactly on the point. We need to find some mechanism for reconciling these two. Richie's response was suitably fatuous. Sounds like relativity doesn't dispute an ether theory. I just said a few minutes ago that it is entirely plausible that there is some form of ether that we have not yet formulated. But if there's no observational evidence for it, we're not. We're not going to believe it. And at the moment, as you said, we just don't have the evidence for any form of ether.
Richie asks, dear host, Jaren is a blower now. I'm not entirely certain what you mean by that. I have my own thoughts on Jaren, which, Tony, if you want to discuss, we can. But in a nutshell, I don't think that Jaren should be given as much respect as he's been shown. His change of heart, as it were, is, I don't think, evidence-driven, but rather a knee-jerk reaction to the amount of vitriol the Flat Earth has thrown his way. Because it's interesting to me that until he took the observations, any observations of the 24-hour sun were bogus. It was only until he did it that they were real, and until he started getting flack for it, I don't believe he immediately said that the Earth was a globe. But Dave McKeegan may have. I think Dave McKeegan may have said otherwise. I'm not entirely certain. I don't remember. But he's not doing this from a place of honesty. He's doing this from a place of, I'm smarter than you. You need to listen to what I have to say. So therefore, there it is. And I think he's going to find a new grift. He's in it for the money. And so.
Yeah, I'm not sure about his motivations, but he certainly has a series of conspiracy theories, vaccine denialism being one of them. Mass shooting denialism is something that he's espoused in the past. I've seen. I'm in a WhatsApp chat where some of his Instagram posts have been shared. He's got some very unusual mindsets. He seems to treat women as trophies that winners seem to get. One of his go-to insults is to call people gay. There's a lot about Jaren that remains deeply problematic. Maybe these will be fixed over time. But I think he's getting, I think, as you say, he's getting too much credit. And I mean, we need to bear in mind this trip costs $40,000, and for $40,000, one flat earther was potentially cured of one of their delusional beliefs.
Yeah.
It's it strikes me as a singularly ineffective, and at the same time we seem to hey JCat,
Hey, Jay.
at the same time we seem to Peter Markley is at liberty to give us lectures on how to give presentations on how to reach flat earthers, while he disputes the scientific evidence for the age of the Earth.
Peter Markley's a young Earth creationist?
Yes, he's a young Earth creationist. He even did a debate on this with Dapper Dinosaur, where he had the evidence present. He had copious amounts of evidence. All it has convinced him to do is to answer no comment when he's asked what the age of the Earth is. So yeah, and I mean, it's sort of it frustrates me that we have it frustrates me that there are a lot of people in the the anti-flat Earth bit who are indeed young Earth creationists. That chap from Answers in Genesis, for instance, an organization that claims that the biblical flood is scientific fact. My speciality is actually glacial isostatic adjustment, which is basically rebound of the Earth in response to large changes in surface load. So our primary data set is paleo sea level data. It's sea level data from around the globe over the past 20,000 years. As an expert in this data, I can tell you that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that any sort of global flood occurred. It's meritocratic. It's absolute nonsense. And for fully trained scientists with PhDs and other people to start claiming this stuff as real, it's deeply disturbing.
Oh yeah. I was going to say, well, the one person I kind of mentioned, because I have his book back here, Jason Lyle, believes that the universe, he does point out in his book that the Earth is a globe, but he still claims that the Earth is, 10,000 years old because of the Bible. And when it comes to, he did his PhD on MHD of the sun, basically the magnetic field generation of the sun. In order to do that, you have to know that the sun is 4.5 billion years old. Like it does not work at all in any way whatsoever. Energy production, any of it works on such a small time scale. And his answer in the book is, well, God just makes it look that way, which is problematic in its own right, because are you telling me that God is deceiving me, and why? So yeah.
There are some odd questions that it never seems to occur to biblical literalists to ask. For example, in the story of Cain and Abel, why was it that God couldn't accept both sacrifices? Why did he only accept one, knowing, as he must have known, that it would lead to a murder? You can't take the Bible literally. It doesn't make sense in that these are stories. Richie says in the chat, "Don't let the state turn you against people who believe in God." That's not the state that does that. It's the people themselves that do that. If those people present counterfactual narratives that I know to be false, if they are lying to their followers and they are lying to the populace, then they are acting in an antisocial and dangerous manner. If people who believe in God would refrain from doing that, I don't care if they believe in God. I believed in God for 30 odd years. I never tried to claim that this trumped science. I never tried to claim that I had evidence that other people should believe. You are welcome to believe in whichever God gives you grace and makes you feel best. But what you can't do is lie on because you think that benefits your God, and then avoid the consequences of that lie. If you are lying, expect to be called out for it.
Yeah, I find there are numerous reasons why, as you stated, that taking the Bible literally is problematic, in that there are definitive, flat-out contradictions within the Bible, such as I've learned recently, who actually killed Goliath. According to 1 Samuel, that's David. According to 2 Samuel, it's Elharon. But then if you look at 2 Chronicles, it's back, Elharon actually killed Goliath's brother. So which is it? Who killed what? These are direct contradictions in these sources. So taking it literally, you can't take it literally, because you can't answer the simple question of who killed Goliath. And there are other examples, like how many angels were there at the tomb when Christ was resurrection, and what did they tell people? Like in one gospel, it's two, and they basically, people see them and just run away, like panic and run. And then in others, there's one outside, one inside, and they basically tell the women, go forth and proclaim the glory of the resurrection and that sort of thing. So, the idea of taking the Bible literally is nonsensical to me.
Also, I mean, in Exodus, Aaron and Moses get into a magic duel with the Pharaoh's sorcerers, and it is not claimed in the narrative that Pharaoh's sorcerers can't do magic. They definitely can. They turn their staves into snakes. But Aaron turns his staff into a bigger snake that eats all of theirs. So you can argue that Aaron is doing a miracle, but the other guys are doing magic. So if you're a biblical literalist, you believe that magic is real. We've all it's a very problematic text to interpret factually. But this growing trend that that in order to be a good Christian you must accept everything in the Bible, literally. It doesn't mesh well with my view of reality.
No, it doesn't mesh well with my sense of being Christian. If you take the Bible literally, I have a cross tattoo, I'm going to hell because I have not, my temple is impure because of Leviticus. And so I've always stated that fundamentalism isn't about trying to bring people into the light or to share. It's about control. It's not about what they're fundamental about. It's about trying to get them to conform to their own worldview and have them be the leader of that worldview. So it's about control and it's about power. It's not about anything else. Be that fundamental Christians, fundamental Muslims, or what have you. Even fundamental atheists, I think, is along those same lines. Those that basically say that you are an evil person if you do believe in God. The other thing I want to say is along the lines of what Richie was talking about is, and I've addressed this in a couple of my vids, is that science does not, or the state does not try to tear you or turn you away from God. Science in and upon itself has nothing to say about God. It cannot be used to disprove God. It cannot be used to prove God.
Yeah.
It's a completely separate issue. So I don't understand where this idea, well, I do understand where this idea comes from. People like Lawrence Krauss and Dawkins have effectively stated it, that that science disproves God. But if you actually look at it in a subjective or objective way, science has nothing to say about divinity, one way or the other, as it should. That's a metaphysical question, not a physical one. So
I would say that at best, there's no necessity for a God in the processes that we see, but you wouldn't expect that. You wouldn't expect God to make something to make something that obvious. I don't think that that's the right argument. And Richie actually said something I agreed with, which I find myself reassessing most of my life choices in this moment. The golden rule and his message is enough. To me, the most impactful Bible story is the parable of the Good Samaritan, where it is made abundantly clear that for a person to qualify for heaven, they must love their neighbor in the same way that the Good Samaritan looked after the man after he'd been beaten by bandits. Now, the point of the story is that the Samaritan is to some extent a different racial group. It's definitely a different religious group, whereas the priests, or the priests is the wrong term, but the Levite and the Sadducees, they walk past, they don't get in. And the message of that story, to me, is that being a good person doesn't depend on religious observances or reading the right scripture and interpreting the right way. It's all about just being a decent person, looking out for the people around. What that is, and I think it's a very powerful parable, and I thoroughly endorse that message. Even though I don't think that the state of the world as it is consistent with the God as described in the Bible. I think that there are way too many people who lie and commit evil on behalf of their religion, and I don't see how God can tolerate that. But that's probably a me problem rather than an anybody else problem. Yeah.
Not to get into that sort of point, but I will say that, or maybe we can, I suppose. It's when I look at that, and I've heard that sort of argument before, or rather sentiment before, is how can God exist in a world of such suffering, is that in order for God to prevent suffering from happening, at the very least, he's going to have to rob us of our free will. He's going to have to force people to not do harm onto other people. And to me, that is anathema the whole thing. As I've been asked, if someone were to ask me what is the one thing that could make you not believe in a higher power, that thing would be to show me demonstrably that free will does not exist. And so I think that, obviously you have natural disasters and diseases and so forth and so on, but a good deal of the evil in this world is man-made. And the only way to really fix that from a divine standpoint is for him to rob us of our ability to choose to do evil. Now, you can make the argument or discuss, isn't that evil in and upon itself? Is free will evil because it allows for evil to be done? I mean, that's a discussion that's probably a very long discussion, but that's my answer to that sort of, or my response to that sort of sentiment is, if we follow, if we are the Good Samaritan, if we all basically take care of each other, if we all love our enemies as we love ourselves and, God, then you wouldn't have as much suffering. You wouldn't have the war in Gaza. You wouldn't have the war in Congo or Ukraine. So,
but this is there are a couple of points that I would raise counter to that. You've made a conflation between suffering and evil, and a lot of suffering has nothing to do with human choices. Animals suffer, in my opinion, unnecessarily all the time. They suffer diseases. They live, lives of terror and hunger in the wild. And God could have made a universe in which predators didn't exist, or in which diseases of animals didn't exist. I don't see why the suffering of animals, the universe, he could have made us herbivorous as well. He could have made everybody herbivorous. But even herbivores eat other animals when they've got the opportunity. Chickens will eat mice at will. Deer will eat chipmunks. Don't. If I would have thought that a God who had sort of large-scale design choices could have designed a universe in which there is significantly less suffering, but this is a 2,000-year-old theological discussion, so I'm not sure that we're going to solve it here. But these are but this gets back to Richie's point. I don't have a problem if you believe in God. I honestly don't. Just don't use it to justify being a dick to other people.
Correct.
And that's where we get into problems. If you are used for Clive Wellsprings, what about eating the baby carrots? There's an Arrogant Worms song about that. But yeah, it's just and if you're an atheist, just don't be a dick to other people. Don't use your atheism to go around to people whose religion brings them happiness and comfort, and start ripping it apart in front of them or attacking them for their for that which has kept them sane and healthy. Just don't be a dick, and which could go on to just be the golden rule. But and this is the problem I see, is that there are a lot of people in the Middle East who are being dicks because their religion tells them that it's right, and it really doesn't work for me. But whatever.
And honestly, there are people, obviously, in the United States who are dicks because of their religious beliefs. I don't know if this is a joke or not. Presumably it is, because God is a little g. When Lisa says when God is on your side, anything is justified, I'm assuming that's the sort of the rationale for fundamentalists, and I would kind of agree with that. But when I look at how Christians are, or how fundamentalist Christians have treated people, it goes back to free will and the idea of the Samaritan, of loving your enemies as you love yourself. Somebody else's actions should not bear on your own, in the sense that if someone does something shitty, that does not justify being shitty to them. Also, one should not legislate one's own morality, because again, take abortion, for example. That is a woman's free choice. That is her free will to do that. And so if you prevent her from doing that, you are robbing her of her God-given free will. And to me, that is a much more, I don't know, that gets into greater and lesser evils, but that is a sin. That cannot be done by the state. That is anathema to God's will, in my opinion. You cannot legislate for that. And when someone would come back to me with, well, what about murder? To me, murder is not a moral decision. It's an ethical one. And the way I define this, probably badly, is that ethical has to do with societal laws. If we did not have a prohibition on murder, our society would break down. It would basically become non-functional, dysfunctional. It wouldn't progress. But if you shut down abortion, society, or rather, if we allow abortions, then society isn't going to break down. It's not the same. It's not equivalent. And the same can be said about thievery.
Well, it's so. The thing about abortion is that the more you look into sort of the biological realities of what happens inside a woman's reproductive system, sometimes you can have conception and the egg just doesn't implant on the wall. Is that a death? If somebody has an early term miscarriage, is that a death? If infants in utero are people, why are there no religious rites for them? Why are there no sacraments? Why don't we have burials and funerals for people who for miscarriages? The simple fact is that as society, we accept the fact that for at least the first 5 to 6 months, a uterus, what's in the uterus cannot be considered a fully blown human. And even if we did accept that, it would be extremely problematic. You can have chimerism, which is where you have twins, and one of the twins absorbs the other, and that person ends up with the DNA of both twins. So one of them killed the other. Which one was it? Who should we convict of murder when they get out of the womb? It's that there are just so many biological facts that are inconsistent with what fundamentalists are trying to prove. And I get back when I was a Christian, I get the simplicity of the mindset. That life begins as conception, and that way we never make any mistakes. But the fact is that that's not how reality operates. It's not how God seems to operate, because if God operated that way, he would simply so that all fertilized eggs implanted, and all implanted fertilized eggs made it to birth without sort of spontaneous miscarriage. I don't even know what that means.
I'll address this in a second, but when it comes to, we don't even know, science can't even tell us when consciousness, science really can't tell us even what consciousness is, let alone when it actually enters the body. And that's the closest that science has anything to say about a quote unquote soul. And so for myself, as I've stated before, I am pro-life. I would not have an abortion if I were to get pregnant, but considering I can't, that's kind of a moot point. If someone were to come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking of getting an abortion, obviously I would weigh the situation. But if it seemed like something that would not cause harm, I would counsel them against it. I would say, hey, have you thought about adoption? What are the hurdles that are preventing you from wanting to take this child to term? And can we figure out a way to remove those hurdles? But ultimately, it's her choice. And the idea of trying to figure out when there is life and when there isn't life, until we can actually figure out what consciousness is and when it comes into the fetus, I don't think we're ever going to answer that question. So Richie here states, does she have the right and have the right and also the right to financial remuneration from the father if she chooses to leave and keep the child? So ultimately, I think what you're saying is if she decides to keep the child and the father doesn't want it, then he doesn't have to pay child support. I think that's where he's going with this.
Yeah. So there are 2 points here. One, it's remuneration, not remuneration. That's just me being pedantic, but it bothers me. You'll get that wrong. You'll get that wrong persistently until somebody corrects you on it. Look it up. The other thing is, suppose somebody was going to die if they didn't receive your kidney. This person is going to die if they don't receive your kidney. Are they entitled to it? Do they have the right to have you held down, put under general anesthetic, and have that kidney removed because they're going to die without you? No, we don't say they have that right. As a society, you have the right to determine whether you want to donate your kidney to somebody. It's not the case that people can come up and just say, I need your blood to live. I need your eye to have sight. We don't do that. So why is an infant in the uterus a different case? Why did they get the right to the products of a woman's body without consent and without right of refusal? Even if we accept that in utero humans are fully human, this is not a right that we as as a society, give to other adults. You don't get to just wander up and say, "Look, I'm going to need 50% of the nutrients your body produces for the next 9 months." That's not how we do anything. So it seems to be a special case, and it irks me a little bit. I'm sure all of the women in the chat are very happy that we're sorting this out for them. But the simple fact is, it's their body, and I'm not inclined to override their judgment and their choice.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. I wanted to say something.
Sorry, I get long-winded, and then everybody forgets what
Oh, it was something I think Richie had said previously, but or was this Lisa? Blood transfusion against some religions, letting a child die because of that is immoral. Yeah. Christian scientists, I think it's Christian scientists who don't believe in healthcare. Should that be legal? So not entirely certain, but yeah, I forgot. Yeah, having two men talk about the abortion issue is a little presumptuous. But I think we are both agreed, both from a someone with faith, someone who doesn't have faith, is that this is a decision for the woman. The state has no business, or anyone else, forcing that woman to bring a child to term. And I think someone, that's what it was. I think someone earlier was saying about what about the health of the mother? And that's even more of a difficult position for pro or anti-choice people to make, is so you are going to allow the woman to die. You're going to effectively allow the child to murder its mother. That's okay, but not the other way around. And from an ethical standpoint, or kind of a morbid sort of societal standpoint, wouldn't having the mother survive be better because the mother could presumably have more kids later down the line?
Yes.
So, there is really no way for me, from a moral standpoint, to support the idea of outlawing or mandating that abortions are illegal. So.
It was one of the most wholesome moments of my stay in the United States, actually. Was watching the Republican candidate debate, I think ahead of the 2008 election. And the candidates were asked, would they introduce legislation against abortion? And one of the candidates, who I quite liked because he played one of the DAs on Law and Order, big man. I can't remember his name. He became famous actually in the Watergate hearings, and then played himself in a movie. Anyway, that's how he got into acting. Anyway, his response was, look, I'm pro-life. I don't believe in abortion. But on the other hand, legislation is not the vehicle by which I should impose my moral decisions on other people. That's not what the law is for. And for this man to stand up and say that, it rocked his campaign. His campaign never recovered. He never really got support after that. But there was a man who had the courage to say in front of everyone what he believed and why he believed it. And I think he hit it right on the nail. You may disapprove of abortion. That doesn't give you the right to legislate on it.
Exactly.
So it's and you can dislike abortion if you want to, and I can understand your reasons why you might make that choice. But ultimately, this is not something that should be legislated. You don't use legislation to force people to do what things you regard as moral. You use legislation to prevent people from doing. Fred Thompson, that is the actor. Yeah. I remember him. Thank you, Clive Wells. You use laws as Rob was saying previously to ensure social cohesion, to prevent or to punish, to prohibit antisocial behavior that will weaken society. You don't do it just because you think something is immoral.
Yeah. So prohibitions on abortion, prohibitions on people's rights because they're gay or transgender or what have you. These are all, in my opinion, immoral things to do. We do not have the right to restrict somebody else's rights simply because we think they are wrong. That is not how democracy works. That is not how freedom works. And so I will rail against any sorts of attempts to do that. It's interesting. Lisa was saying, Christian male legislators do not agree with abortion or making abortion decisions that they don't understand menstrual cycles. I can go two directions with that. The first one is one of the things that I'm curious about with literal people, Christians who are literal. Do they send their wives out of the city when they menstruate?
It's a good question, because they're impure, right?
Yeah, they're unclean. So they have to leave the town. So do they ship them off every month or what have you? But the other thing you could say about this is, and this also goes to climate change and just science skepticism, is you have legislators who do not understand the science and are making fundamental laws concerning huge issues like climate change. At this point, I am the opinion that we are very near the tipping point, and actually, in my more cynical moments, because Trump has been elected, we're fucked. Because I think radical change needs to happen within the next 4 years or so. And because Trump is not only not going to do the steps to mitigate climate change, he's actually going to make it worse. I think that we may have, again, in my most cynical, hyperbolic moments, we may have doomed the world by electing that dude.
Well, one of the things that sort of alarmed me at the university that I work at, we had a chap called Frank Fenner, and Frank Fenner is not a name you may know, but it turns out that he was the guy tasked by the World Health Organization with certifying that smallpox had been eradicated. So he was quite a big name in sort of public health. And his position 15 years ago was that as an expert in public health was that humans would be extinct within 100 years due to a combination of overpopulation and climate change. If there's, let's suppose that there's a 1% chance that he was right. We haven't done, we've only made the problem worse in the years since. That probability is going up, and it's going up, and it's going up, and then eventually, it's just going to be too late. And it may already be too late. One of the things about these tipping points is, as I say, the carbon emissions stop being under the control of humans, and at that point, we're kind of fucked. So,
the reality of a tipping point is not if, it's when. There is a tipping point. So what we need to do is we need to mitigate ourselves to not get to that tipping point. If we don't, it's going to happen, and we are going to be fucked as a species. Will humanity be totally eradicated? I don't think so. I think that some small subsection of humanity will somehow eke out existence at high latitudes, or maybe even caves or something. But as a global society, humanity will have been destroyed.
In past mass extinctions, most of which have been caused by climate change, in which carbon dioxide emissions.
Oh, you're cutting out. This is more than usual. Actually, I think he's cut out entirely. Tony, if you can hear me, you are frozen. Yes, I agree that the loss. Oh no, I'm thinking of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. All right, I think this is a sign that I'm going to shut down the stream because it is a 2 hour. We are at the 2 hour mark, and I do need to get back to work. So thank you all for being here. My name is Professor Parks, PhD, and I make content on astronomy, science, skepticism, and mental health. If you like that sort of thing, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications, because I rarely give people any sort of notification or any sort of, well, I do not have a schedule. I do not go live every Tuesday. I go live whenever I feel like it. So if you want to know, hit that bell. If you'd like to support my efforts at the observatory, please consider becoming a patron of mine. All of that money goes to supporting the observatory in big ways, like buying cameras, to small ways, like buying power strips and the like. If you would like to help me financially, please consider becoming a channel member. And as I said earlier, if you do, there are member-only videos where I will be discussing the Landalt mission, which is a NASA mission that was approved by Dr. Peter Plavchan here in the department. So I will give updates on how that is going if you're interested. So yeah. Peace out. Clear skies. Oh, hold on. What? Oh, my outro video is not. For some reason, my outro video is loaded up on my laptop, but not on this machine, and I really need to get to it. But anyway, so peace out. Clear skies.